breakfast puppies?
This podcast contains adult language and content and is meant for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Well, you just go on there and keep on listening to the Glitterbois.
So tonight, we're talking about the powers of the mind. The realm beyond the physical. And not in one of those weird, magical playing with forces you're not supposed to know, or playing around with demons, or getting on your knees and begging someone to treat you decently and give you gifts. We're talking about psionics. And psionics across the multiverse, or Megaverse.
Get it right.
Get it right. Yep. They're coming for me.
They're coming to take me away. Oh, no. Okay. Psionics are something that we delved into pretty heavily in a very recent episode where we talked about the Mind Melter. And we had a lot of discussion follow that online. So when we were planning this recording session, we're like, let's just sort of keep that going. Let's get back into the psionics. Let's talk more about it. And psionics, as Matthew so heavily and eloquently and frustratingly vented about, have a storied history.
Mm-hmm.
Long story short, D&D did them wrong. And if you want to know more about that, go back and listen to the Mind Melter episode where that rant just kind of goes on and on.
And listen to our interview with Kevin.
Yeah.
Where Kevin talks about how the D&D treatment of psionics was one of the things that led him to do the writing for the Palladium system.
Yep. So now that you've listened to those, and now that you understand where we're coming from, again, psionics and D&D sucked ass. They were just terrible. Psionics and Palladium are actually pretty cool.
Yeah. When you're talking psionics and Palladium, it's a consistent system relatively across all the books, with one big exception, that's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Other Strangeness, where their psionics are Bio-E based, and so it's a slightly different system.
I would say there's another one, and that is first edition Palladium Fantasy.
Yes, but you're still dealing with ISP, and the mechanics are relatively similar. You can see your way from one to the other, whereas Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is a detour into an undiscovered country that I have nothing against. It actually fits the system real well.
They're more like superpowers.
But they're more like superpowers.
Yeah.
So, psionics. What do you like about them, both from concept and implementation in the Palladium system?
Oh, man. Okay. I don't really personally have any kind of a deep attachment to the whole concept of psionics as a thing. To me, they're just another type of magic. What I like about them in Palladium specifically is that, at least in most of the major systems that have it, not all, but most, it is a universally accessible thing.
Mm-hmm.
There are character classes and races that focus on them more than others, if not specialize in them entirely. But unless you are of a race or species that does not, that explicitly does not have access to it, every character in Palladium has a potential chance of having that extra little scope of power at your hands, that unexpected ability. Maybe all you can do is resist cold, but still, that's something that guy next to you can't do. It's a little bit of a nice bonus that not only can come into handy at the most unexpected of times during play, but also suddenly gives you more to think about your character's backstory when you're creating that character. How did this affect their life? They're just a mercenary fighter, just a human mercenary fighter. They have nothing really special about their life, and yet they can read minds. How did this change their life? Suddenly you have a whole different character from that one random power roll.
Or perhaps they're I don't know, sort of backwater peasant who no one seems to have caught on yet, never wears anything but basically what amounts to a tunic and a pair of pants, no matter what the weather is.
Is this the Pokemon peasant?
Yes, it's the Pokemon peasant.
One of Jacob's characters in our Palladium fantasy game, everybody is basically trying to turn into a Pokemon trainer.
Yes. It's like, oh, we've encountered another small creature. Give it to the peasant.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that Palladium achieves what original Advanced Dungeons and Dragons was trying to do. Because original Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, anybody had the chance to be a psionic. There was that random chance thing. But it was mechanically clunky. Let's not even get into the old Matrix table of psychic power or psychic defense versus psychic attack. I'm sorry, we need to take a break, folks. NPC is having a seizure.
Head's twitching. It's all good. It's all good. I got these nice Palladium books in front of me. Lovingly touch them. Okay.
It's very, very nice. Very, very simple. It's one of the best systems for it that didn't treat it just like a superpower.
So my love of Palladium Psionics comes from my love of Palladium Fantasy First Edition. That was that's the game that started me as a gamer. Maybe not a gamer, but that's the one that started me as somebody who sits at a table and rolls dice and plays elf games. That was my first free game. I love the Palladium Fantasy take on it because it treats it as a wizard, but a wizard of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
The Mind Mage, we'll talk about the Mind Mage on its own episode, but the focus on psionics as a main character appeal, the main source of power, essentially treats it like a wizard, just with their own specialized list of mental spells. But it creates a system where every time you level up, you are guaranteed to get more power. You just don't know which power you're going to get.
Yeah.
Randomized, and I love it. I think that the Mind Mage actually gets a lot more control over that. But
yes,
the whole, that slow accumulation of power is pretty nice, and it works very well with the first edition ethos.
Very much so.
Yeah.
But then they went on from there. One of the systems that is completely lacking in psionics, one of the few actually, is ninjas and super spies. While there are chi key abilities that replicate some sorts of psionic things, the psionic system is completely absent from the game. But beyond that, it's in Heroes Unlimited. I don't believe it's in Dead Rain.
I think
I don't remember. That was one I meant to look up, and I didn't have a chance.
Dead Rain is a major blind spot for me. Yeah.
It's not in System Shock either. Or System Failure.
It is in System Failure. They have the I'm quite sure it's got to be.
Okay.
Okay. It's got to be. I think it's got to be.
Okay.
I could go check. I'm just going to say without checking that there's got to be psionics in System Failure. I know there is in Mechanoids.
There is in Mechanoids.
And I might be thinking of Mechanoids.
Of course, it's in Rifts. Yeah. Of course, it's in Heroes Unlimited. Yeah. It's in Splicers, many of the other systems they've done. Mm-hmm. And it is all over the place, wall to freaking wall and beyond the supernatural.
Yeah, we were just discussing this before we talked about this, and you had answered a question for me, which I had assumed that Beyond the Supernatural was nothing but psychic characters.
No.
But apparently not.
Nope. It is predominantly psychic characters,
mm-hmm.
And it's also where they really started dabbling in with narrow scope psychic characters, where it's like the Pyro from Rifts,
mm-hmm.
where it's you can look at that echoed back in Beyond the Supernatural with some of the very specialist psychic characters whose powers fall in a very limited stretch. But in Beyond the Supernatural, both first and second edition, you have arcanists, diviners, several other forms of non-psychic powered people. But it is predominantly psychics, firewalkers, the game breaker that's the nega psychic.
I mean, Beyond the Supernatural is the origin of PPE.
Yeah.
Or potential psychic energy, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure if it's the origin. I actually think I want to say yes, but I'm not gonna hard defend that one with my reputation. I'm not entirely sure it didn't show up first.
So they're not in Robotech.
Right.
They're not in Recon.
Right.
They're not in Ninjas and Super Spies.
I do not know whether they showed up in Heroes Unlimited before they showed up in Beyond the Supernatural.
That's a good question.
And that's my big...
But PPE still doesn't matter in Heroes Unlimited, at least in original edition.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure that's a...
It literally comes down to publishing dates.
Because I know ISP was in First Ed Fantasy.
Yep.
Might have even been in Mechanoids. So we got 3 potentially system failure, which might be the 4th one that doesn't have psychics. Okay. Yeah. Palladium's got a lot of psychics.
Yeah. Lots of psychics. And both the generalist sort of psychics, where you just randomly have psychic powers, and then the more focused ones. Everything from the Mind Melter, the Pyro, the, cough, Psy Stalker. Yeah, you're still psychic. Quit whining.
Yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with Psy Stalkers. I think they're really freaking cool.
Mm-hmm.
My hate relationship comes with people wanting to use them as the basis for another character class.
Yeah.
And you're like, there we approach that X.cc. We're figuring out what the zones of them are. Is it an RCC, an OCC, a PCC?
Yeah.
Which one can be the other kind of thing? And it can be a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
It's one of the very few things that I think is done better in the Savage version.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that.
So when did we get what it is now? And that is instead of the level-based list of powers, it's the area of expertise-based list. So right now, anybody familiar with Fantasy or Rifts, the major ones, we've got the sensitive powers, the healing powers, the physical powers, and of course, the super category.
I have to say that probably dates back to Beyond the Supernatural. Just going through it, you have everything from the latent psychic, which is more of your everyman who gets random powers, a la First Ed Fantasy, that sort of thing, to things like the physical psychic, who all of their powers are channeled through their body, psychic healers that focus on healing abilities and resistance abilities, psychic mediums, which is all about clairvoyance, clairaudience, palmistry, all of that. And then all of their, what would be in many other versions of the Palladium system, the super psychics, the nega psychic, the firewalker, who's pyrokinetic like crazy. And so the first time, like telemechanics in BTS, if you look at the psi mechanic in BTS, you know exactly where Techno Wizards came from.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can draw a pretty straight line, even though the system, the concept is magic rather than psionics. But that narrow focus really, really appeared for the first time in BTS. And, given BTS, really was looking back at things like Kolchak the Night Stalker and that 70s, early 80s take on psionic powers, where they, people were super specialized in areas. It very much cribbed from that.
And a real quick shout out to Jason from the Nerds RPG Variety podcast, who had I met through listening through this podcast. He joined our Discord, and I know, Jacob, you would frequently refer to this show, Kolchak the Night Stalker, but it wasn't until listening to Jacob's show where not Jacob, sorry,
No.
Jason's show, where he actually did this, deep dive into Kolchak that I'm like, okay, now I'm watching this.
Yes. I'm glad you finally came to your senses and watched
It's really good.
It's really good.
And I don't understand why, I have never heard of it outside of the two of you people talking about it.
It's, if you want to get into, I recommend anyone who's interested in running Beyond the Supernatural or doing more modern psychic games, really sit down and do a watch marathon of Kolchak the Night Stalker. It has a completely different take on what a hero, who a hero can be. Like, your main protagonist is a freaking newspaper reporter.
Yeah.
The picture of Kolchak with a crossbow will live with me forever.
Yeah. Psychics in Palladium have some kind of a special feel that I don't get in other psychic heavy role-playing games. Okay. Going back to D&D. D&D had its categories of psychics. You had your kineticists. I forget the others. Just remember the kineticists.
The trauma is real, folks.
They had some interesting names. They're on the tip of my tongue. But they each had their scope of power. But with D&D, it all felt kind of boxed in.
Yeah.
It was a singular thing, and some people could have it, or some people could be really good at it. But then you look at what Palladium has done with it. And you look at something like Rifts, right? Now with Rifts, again, any character, if you're of a species that can do it, you have a chance of being psionic. Or if you want to just be all psionic, you can be the Mind Melter.
Yep.
Or the Burster.
Burster. I kept calling it the Pyro. Jesus.
But then you do have the Psi Stalker.
Yep.
Or the Mystic. Or my favorite, the Dog Boy. These are characters that take these same psychic abilities and use them in very interesting ways that are something that you might not come up with on your own just looking at a list of psychic powers. It's one of my favorite things about the Rift system is how they keep presenting these characters that have just, more or less the same mix of powers that you might find out there, but they've remixed them in a certain way that they all work together and drive towards a certain theme. And it's beautiful to see in motion.
One of the conceits of the Palladium system that I find to be a substantial differentiator between how Palladium handles it and many other role-playing games handle it is anybody who has the chance to be psychic can be psychic, and then they can get into the grab bag of psychic abilities, which is primarily by chance. However, then you have the psychic character classes, the PCCs. The conceit that Palladium brings to the table, which is by narrowing your focus, you increase your power. If you think about it, a lot of the quote-unquote super psychics in the Palladium system have very, very narrow ranges of psychic powers they can play with, but they also have some of the most powerful in the range that they have. And again, that is back in BTS. Many people could be psychic. Many people could have some of the psychic healing abilities that anybody has access to, but you aren't going to hold a candle to the psychic healer because that's all they do. That is the focus of their being.
Yeah.
And I think that differentiator is one of the things that, at least for me, makes the Palladium psychic system so good.
Yeah. And years ago, I had a GM. This was my college years. had a GM who ran a Rifts game, and it was a simple premise, and we only made it through a couple of sessions on it before we drifted in different directions, like you do. But the premise was, we're all going to play a Rifts game. It's going to be Rifts North America, and each of you can only play a vagabond with
the old
one
Vagabond game.
power. Pick any one singular power from the core book. It can be a racial power. It can be an OCC ability. It can be a spell. It can be an ability or whatever. And almost all of us went for psychic powers. We went for the psychic superpowers because they're mostly pretty broad and versatile. You get a vagabond with pyrokinetics. He's a burster.
Yep.
You know, that's all you need.
So what you're telling me is you played Riff's Godlike.
This was way before Godlike, but yes. Yeah. We actually, the same group of people, we played semi-regularly a game that one of the players in the group, a different person who was our sometimes GM, called Kroger Superheroes. And Kroger Superheroes was the game that you played when you're standing in a really long grocery line at Kroger waiting to check out. And it was, you're a superhero and you have one power. What is it? And it's got to be stupid. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
So I don't know Godlike, but it sounds pretty cool.
Yeah. Godlike, you have one superpower. You can jump football fields or you can fly, but that's it. That you have one superpower and that's all you can do.
Yeah.
And that's the conceit. It is based in a World War II period setting.
Those are my favorite eras for superheroes and my favorite limitations. I think a superhero should have one power. That's the only way that I can personally get into supers games, because when you start to build like a smorgasbord of powers, or I'm lost. But if you're just like, you have one thing, I can fly. I am also an overweight tubby gamer with arthritis, but I can fly. And that's all that matters. Yeah.
Palladium does a lot right. Now let's talk about some of the challenges. I'm not going to say things that it does wrong, but some of the challenges of playing under Palladium Psionic rules. Because so many of the powers are so broad, you end up running into a lot of situations where you have to make on-the-fly GM calls about them. Does the peasant with cold resistance have any protection when it's -60? Things like that, where it's non-magical, but that, you end up having to make those. And the powers are so broad that you have to, as the GM, be willing to yes and or no but a lot with them, because oftentimes players who both select psionic powers and actually keep track of what their powers are will be some of the most creative users of their powers, because they'll try to figure out weird and interesting ways to use them in very broad situations.
That to me is one of the appeals of the system.
Yes, it is a challenge, but it's also an appeal.
Yeah.
You just have to go into it prepared. Know that that's what you're buying into as a game master in the system. That's not to dissuade anyone. Get your, you have to work on your game master chops, thinking on your feet, that sort of thing. It's making you a better game master anyway by doing it, but it's something to have in the back of your mind when you have a psionic player at the table.
Yeah.
The other big thing is deciding how tightly you want to track PPE.
Or ISP. Yeah.
Even some psychic classes don't start out with a lot of energy in the tank, and it's totally possible for someone to blow through it real quickly. And if they're a psionic character, a psionic profession, once they tap out, they're often kind of limited on what they can do.
Yeah.
And in some systems under the Palladium system, some classes have, shall we say, lower than you'd expect energy levels at low levels, given that they're supposedly psychic specialists.
Fair enough.
Yeah, there's one or two classes in Beyond the Supernatural where like I actually throw another D6 at the person because you took this class, the math just doesn't work out. This is what the powers built that you're going to be playing with are. This is what your PPE starting out is. You want to be able to do more than one thing a day.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like the first level wizard in D&D.
Right.
Right.
It's literally the first level wizard in D&D problem. So, but without, scrolls. So there's all of that. The other big challenge is remembering that your NPCs have psionic abilities too. The number of times I've walked away from an adventure and went, well, shit. If the big bad of the adventure had actually remembered that he had psionic powers, he could have been regenerating, or XYZ. And so it's one of those things where you have to keep it in the back of your mind if it's an important facet of the NPC.
We could go on a much deeper discussion about how to remember your character's powers as a GM, because I've run into that problem many times, not just with psionics, but with everything.
Mm-hmm.
Well, mainly psionics and spells.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, this really is an area where Palladium books suffer heavily. Is an NPC stat block will have something like knows all spells level 1 through 7, knows all psionics level 9 through 14 or something. And you're like, oh, fuck. Now I got to go look up the shit. You couldn't have just listed it out. Like you went through all this trouble to give me all of this exacting detail about a character. I don't need to know God's hit points, but it would be nice to know what spells God can cast. It's just, yeah. That is a complaint.
Now, this, however, does open up some great opportunities. Because just like your quote-unquote oppositional NPCs have all of this, can potentially have all the psychic powers that your players do, so does your random NPC on the street. What if the sergeant of the town guard in fantasy doesn't even know he's psychic? He's just really good at realizing when people are lying to him. Yeah. It's you can throw in even some very, very, very low-level psychic powers at a barmaid or the sergeant of the town guard or whoever, and radically change an encounter in interesting ways. Now, and not just in like oppositional to your player characters, i.e. the town guard, sergeant who can detect lies, but in other ways, like the drunkard in the corner, who everybody thinks he's a drunkard because he's sitting there drinking all day, but he actually has one of the psychic powers that cleanses his system. So he just happens to really like the taste of beer. Is that going to do anything other than make an interesting and creative character? Not really. I mean, unless you challenge him to a drinking tournament and then he drinks you under the table. But, these psychic powers can be used more in the smash face, solve puzzles sort of way in some very creative ways. And I enjoy doing that a lot.
And I love seeing that in play, looking at Palladium books where they are describing the setting, most specifically things like Old Ones or even Western Empire, those where there's given, here's a city and here's 100 different key point locations. And, this particular tanner, well, he's a psychic. He can influence emotions. He's been He's just discovered this ability and is experimenting on his neighbors. And you're like, okay, well, there's right there, boom, adventure.
Yep.
Or just these random happenstance. This character has this ability and doesn't know how to use it, or this character is actually, making a profit by reading the minds of his customers or something.
And then there's the aspect, because Palladium psychic powers are so broad, you can actually do some very fun roleplay customization with them. And like, again, I'm going to go back to Beyond the Supernatural and bring it up again. Like, there are a whole bunch of instances in BTS where characters have X psychic ability, but the character channels it. Like, I believe I'm gonna probably get this wrong. Someone will call me out on it for sure. There is at one point an NPC who has clairvoyance. However, they channel it by doing tarot card readings.
Yeah.
And given the conceits of the Palladium system, where it's all about self-control, inner control, or in cases like the Burster, literally giving up control, being able to take that conceit and channel it through a very creative role-playing aspect to give your characters, whether you're the GM or the player, color, is one of the strong points.
And that is something that there's no rules for.
Right.
But the rules really, they are written on the back of the book where it says, unleash your imagination.
Yep.
Right here, under the list of character classes, more than 30 of whatever, you have all of these powers, unleash your imagination. That's the rule.
Yep.
That's what lets you take things and do that. That's what lets... I have an NPC in an adventure that I wrote. I ran it at WagonCon last year, and this NPC, she was a singer in a metal band, and she captured the attention of the audience, and the metal band was like gaining a lot of acclaim, and she didn't know she was a mage. And she was I found all of these powers, and I gave her these powers, and it's like, none of these powers specifically say that it works this way, but you know what? Fuck it, it's cool. It's going to work this way. And when you have this list of abilities, be they psychic, be they magic, and you say, look, I know it doesn't say this, but I want to try and use it this way. And if your GM says, no, I'm sorry, that's not how the book says it works, we gotta stick with the rules, then you're breaking that first rule, guys. You gotta unleash that imagination. You gotta open it up and let that weird ass shit happen. That is, to me, the beauty of this system. You can do that in other games.
Yeah.
Sure. I just feel like Palladium encourages it more.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
A lot of players, I think, need to get into the old school Renaissance mentality, which is rulings over rules. You have a spell that says it does this effect to someone. Okay, you cast this spell on them and they have frostbite. Okay, what does frostbite do? Well, I got to look in the Game Master's Guide.
Yeah.
Find the list of effects and look up the exact things of frostbite. Oh, fuck, frostbite's not there. I don't know what to do. Make shit up. Like, just go with it. Role play having frostbite. Or how would that debilitate your character? We don't need to throw minuses and pluses and some numbers to this. Just go with it. And I think that's a lot how the psychics work. Like, they inflict these insanities, and most of the insanities don't tell you how to behave.
Nope.
They're just a list of things that make you crazy, and then you get to take it and run with it.
Yep.
And that, okay, I'm going on a rant here, but that whole like D&D style codified list of adjectives, and here's what each and every adjective means in the universe with this mechanics. I know what keen is versus sharp. Or something. It's rant over. Sorry, folks.
No. I think you did bring up some really valid points there. And definitely, like, I sometimes feel like the psionics are sort of underappreciated in the Palladium system.
Hmm.
I mean, there's enough people who play characters with them, but it's like I always feel like that everybody could be tapping more.
Tell me more.
Well, just in the feel, what it brings to your character to actually have, psionics, what its impact on the world.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like always handled at either the micro of the player and what they're doing, and
Mhm.
and a lot of people just boil it down to numbers, rules, and effects rather than feel, or the macro where you have this entire nation state of the coalition that exists to in part wipe out every psionic they can get their hands on.
Okay.
And they miss the middle ground, and they miss the individual feel, and they miss the entire, like I was talking about, the fact that literally any human being and many other races could have some level of psychic powers.
Giving me a lot to think about here. Like, there's so much opportunity for power to affect your growth and life that, okay, I could be a little biased here, but of the race class systems that I've played, race class level, combo, classic traditional systems, I can't help but feel like Palladium gives more opportunity for that to develop, for you to think about how your character fits into the world with their powers. Then I am elf wizard, I am tiefling rogue number 17, or I am elf wizard number 112, or something. With the variety and the way that psionics are implemented in Palladium, yeah, I think that it does give more opportunity for that.
Yeah.
And maybe players should think about that more.
I always think so, just because, the more the players and the GM both think about it, especially the players, the more interesting characters they develop, the more hooks they give their GM, the more color there is to the game.
Like a Glitterbois. You're just a Glitterbois. You're just a Glitterbois pilot. You rolled up the Glitterbois pilot skills, and you can sense emotions.
Yeah.
Okay. That's new. We're yeah. I think we're drifting.
Yeah.
I feel like I have some important thoughts just on the tip of my tongue. I need to see more well-played psychic characters, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, all of the pieces are there. I see better portrayal of psychic powers through characters who just happen to randomly roll them as additional abilities than I tend to see in the actual psychic characters.
Yeah.
And I feel that's because with Palladium, it feels more special when you randomly roll it, as opposed to I sit down and I play the mind mage.
Yep.
And I just have mind powers. And sure, those powers are cool. However, again, the Glitterbois here, he can sense emotions, and that's awesome.
I think part of what drives that is the fact that because in Palladium, usually psychic powers are random unless you're playing a psychic character class, you just randomly get this, and then you have that moment with, how do I incorporate it into the being of this character? Which a lot of people don't do when they play a character class that's all about their psychic powers. It's like, that's part of my character. It doesn't have that nested point of decision where you have to think about, what does that mean for this character I'm creating?
When did it manifest? How has it affected my life?
Yeah.
Things to think about. I'm going to be pondering this one longer. Do you have any final thoughts on the topic of psychic across the Megaverse?
Absolutely. Play Beyond the Supernatural. It's first edition, second edition, whatever is more your speed. I will admit a mild preference towards first edition. But great game system, within one game book, you have like, I think 16 different takes on psychic characters, including the nega psychic, which is the anti-psychic, except it's like, what happens when a person with psionic abilities believes that UFOs are always swamp gas? And there's some great things there. Even if you never play the game, it's worth giving the book a read, because even though the other game books in the Palladium line don't have psychic powers, you really see what the Palladium crew was thinking about when they really put gas to the fire with psychic powers.
And for folks who are, like me, a little hesitant against psychic powers when you first hear about them, and still have burned into your souls the distaste from first edition D&D, AD&D psychics and how broken they were.
Show me on the doll where the ego whip touched you.
Built into the Palladium system from the moment you roll your stats is the protection against these types of characters. One of the 8 core attributes of the Palladium fantasy, of the Palladium role-playing engine, the Megaverse, one of those 8 core attributes. The second one that you roll is your protection against psychic abilities. And they can get pretty up there. So have no fear. There are resistances against these powers, in case you were worried. As opposed to AD&D, where you were just fucked.
So, anything else?
That's all I got. Anything else, I feel like I would just be dithering, you know?
Also, you were right about systems failure. NORAD psychic.
I thought so.
We're going to say it now and just save it from somebody rolling into our Discord to scream.
I kept wanting, see, my brain, it was Esper, but that's mechanoids. But I had a feeling there was some kind of an institutionalized psychic ability here.
Yep.
Okay, NORAD psychic. There we go.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's 3 then. We have Recon,
Ninjas and Super
Spies. And what was the other one?
Sort of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
No. Specifically, no psychics. I don't know.
Dark.
It was the third.
Maybe Dead Rain, but
maybe no.
Maybe
the third. Already lost it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
this too happens when you get old.
Yeah. Well, thanks for listening, folks. We appreciate it. Drop by Discord. Tell us your thoughts on psychic powers and Palladium and why you love or hate them. That's all I got.
Yeah. Have a good one.
Good night.
Starships, magic, mystic martial arts, romance. All of these can be found in A Cloak of Blades by Isaac Scher. You might have heard my name before. I've done a lot of voiceover work for Breakfast Puppies, and I've recently released my first novel. It's available on Amazon as an ebook and paperback, and you can get it for free if you have a Kindle Unlimited subscription. I do hope you'll support my work as you're supporting Breakfast Puppies, and it's been a pleasure talking with you today. Have a good one.
You've been listening to The Glitterbois, a Palladium Books fan podcast. Glitterbois, Rifts, the Megaverse, and all other such topics are the property of Kevin Siembieda and Palladium Books. Please buy all their stuff and help keep them in print and making more games. You can order directly at palladiumbooks.com, and their entire catalog is available digitally at Drive-Thru RPG as well. Our opening music is 8-Bit Bass and Lead by Furby Guy from freesound.org. This closing music is Caravana by Philip Gross, available at freemusicarchive.org. All sound effects used are self-made or acquired via Creative Commons 0 license. If you like what you have heard, find us on Twitter and Facebook as The Glitterbois. That's BOIS. And check us out online at breakfastpuppies.com/glitterboys. And also join us on the Breakfast Puppies Network Discord at breakfastpuppies.com/discord. And if you want to help us out, please spread the word and help us build a community. Thanks again for listening. We'll catch you next time.